Welcome back to the Accomplishment Project. It's been a while. Today's episode is a really special one for me, and the reason why it's taken a little while since my last episode is because it's my first in-person interview for the podcast, and this conversation took a little bit more time to bring to life than I expected, but in a way that feels very aligned with what this project is all about, right? Because accomplishment doesn't always happen on a clean timeline. So today I'm sharing a conversation I recorded a couple months ago with someone who has been a part of my life for a really long time. His name is Jonathan Miller, and he is one of me and my husband Tim's close personal friends, and someone we've both known since just shortly after college. He is the founder of Element Bars, which is a company that creates custom nutrition bars and has grown into a full-scale manufacturing operation supporting customers and business owners who are building their own bar brands. And one amazing thing about Jonathan was that he was on season 1, episode 6 of Shark Tank. So we get to hear this journey. So this is an accomplishment story episode, and it's actually a two-part conversation because it was that good. And in this first episode, we're going to focus on Jonathan's early path, where his entrepreneurial mindset came from, his experience working in more traditional roles after college, and what ultimately led him to start Element Bars. But I want to say something important before we get into this interview. Jonathan is someone who I see as incredibly accomplished in a very full and well-rounded way. He's intelligent, creative, thoughtful, and grounded. He's a devoted husband and dad, a great storyteller, and someone who has always stayed very true to himself. And that's a big part of why I wanted to have him on the podcast. So if you've ever considered starting your own business or wondered what it actually looks like to build something from the ground up, I think you're going to see a lot in this conversation, and I learned so much from this conversation as we were going through it. So let's get into it. All right, it's our first in-person interview. I'm so excited. I literally made this room for you. Fun story. Miller did not want to, or you were nervous about technology and doing a.
I was, and I sort of knew it would be a little bit of a challenge to you. So
Yeah.
I was like, which was
But look
great.
at how amazing this
This room
is.
turned out amazing.
It's
It's
so
great to
good.
speak in person.
Yes. So today we're going to talk about you. We've known each other for a super long time, and you are super accomplished in my eyes. Do you feel accomplished?
I do, but like any good entrepreneur, there's always more to be done. So
Yes. I really want people who are watching or listening to this episode, if they're interested in the entrepreneur journey or if they are just curious to see how the decisions that you've made in your life, how that's impacted. I really love the fact that when people share their stories, that there's always a learning. And
yeah.
so I know most of your story, but we're going to go all the way back. So before we even met, I knew you had an entrepreneurial spirit. I know that you've worked for companies as well. So I just want to get a download of your entire history work-wise.
So yeah, the first entrepreneurial venture that I had was that I programmed Tetris, the game, onto the TI graphing calculator. And then I sold it to my friends. And this was back in like 8th grade. So I've always had this entrepreneurial idea of first solve a problem for yourself because I was bored in math class, but then be able to sell it to other people. And the thing that I learned from that venture was also the idea that if you don't protect your idea in some way, that it may be given away to other people. And so when I first wrote the software, there wasn't any protection to it. I'd sell it to one person and they would copy it from that person onto the next person, onto the next person. And so it was a great learning, both from what people want, how to sell it, but then also how to protect it or think about the long-term success of a company. And that's a lot for an 8th grader to be able to take in, but it was certainly a good, easy way to do it before it was high stakes later on when you're actually post-college or whenever you decide to launch your business.
So were your parents entrepreneurs too?
No, my parents aren't entrepreneurs. Well, the question is, do you consider a physician an entrepreneur? which is sort of an interesting question because my dad is an eye doctor. He was in private practice, so he obviously had to run his own business. But doctors historically don't make great entrepreneurs because they actually, in my opinion, they don't have the same risk tolerance that an entrepreneur sort of needs to. So doctors tend to actually be much lower risk, and then the risks that they take seem almost illogical to me as a person that is in business. And so I certainly saw my dad having the office. I remember working in his office, helping with like billing and stuffing envelopes and all the rest of that stuff. So I had a sense of what it would be to run a business, but not really. There's no inventory. You're not manufacturing anything. Obviously, this was way before technology and those types of things. So not on my dad's side. My mom, she has her PhD in technology. And so she would help develop curriculum for school districts. And so she developed this technology, but it was kind of on the nonprofit side as opposed to a for-profit. But she also had to create these things and then go and sell them. It was entrepreneurship light for my parents is what I would say.
Okay. So I'm going back to Tetris. Why did you want to sell it?
Well, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but the obvious one is money. Right? Is you want money to go buy whatever. It's like I remember they had the spirit shop that you could buy candy at lunch at our school, and I wanted money, and my parents were not going to give me money to go buy candy and junk. So if I got it from other kids, I'd be able to buy the candy. But there is also a sense of accomplishment in selling a product to somebody else. And that is just really gratifying, right? Is getting your very first sale, no matter what it is. It doesn't actually matter the dollar amount, right? Mm-hmm. It matters that somebody else stepped up and said, this is good enough that it's worth it for me to be able to pay. And so that was an early high, as it were, to my first entrepreneurial venture.
Okay, so after 8th grade, you sold this game.
Right.
What
comes next? There was probably some high school mishigas of other entrepreneurial ventures, which I won't get into. But what I will say, broadly, actually, it's kind of interesting. There's a pretty strong correlation between juvenile crime and entrepreneurship. And I've thought about this when I reflected. I learned about this when I was in business school originally. But what is it? What is it about somebody who's willing to commit a crime and somebody who's willing to be an entrepreneur? And I'm not proposing that anyone commits any crime, but we do think differently about breaking the rules, right? There are people who just see the world as it is and say it's good enough, right? And these are the rules that I operate in. And there are people who try to look around and find that little edge and create the world maybe in their own vision, as it were. And that's an entrepreneurship. So there was another entrepreneurial journey later in high school. You know, I'll leave it at that one. I did not get arrested or anything else like that. But, you know, I probably pushed the margin a little bit on that one. Okay. My real next and true entrepreneurial venture was when I was in college as a sophomore at Northwestern. I was fed up for the high price of paying for books. It was classic Chicago winter, just like it is right now here. And I did not want to trudge all the way across campus to go buy books at the bookstore. And so I had a whole bunch of websites up. I had, at the time, it was Borders and Barnes and Nobles and other ones that don't exist anymore, like Big Words, trying to buy a textbook. And I said, there's got to be an easier way. And so I started getcheapbooks.com, first really as just for myself, right? Because I didn't actually think about it for the money. And the really interesting story I tell here is that it really wasn't about the money, because at the time that I started it, 1999, Amazon, who also was listed on there, didn't have affiliate marketing. So affiliate marketing, if people don't know, is where you get paid a % of the sales that you drive to a person's website. So Amazon didn't have that. So what I did was I cold called Amazon and I said, I'm going to drive you traffic for a month. And if at the end of the month you think it's worth it, I think you should pay me some amount of money. And so, you know, again, I built it without the revenue model known at the time, right? Because I wasn't earning those affiliate fees. And I can't say for sure that I'm somehow convinced Amazon to do affiliate marketing. Not true. But I'm sure there are enough people like me out there that basically came together at about the same time and said, look, this traffic is worth something to you guys. What is that worth? And so, you know, at the end of the month, they agreed and said, all right, we'll pay you 5% of all the traffic that we drive you. then the business model came in, right? So it was first solve a problem for myself, or see a problem, then solve a problem, and then figure out how you potentially could make money from it. The analogy I also give is I like woodworking, but I don't want to become a carpenter, because there's a difference between a kind of a personal hobby and something that you make money on.
Yeah.
And so that's where all three of those things kind of have to come together. So Get Cheap Books was great. So that was the real venture that actually made me a good amount of money.
So, do you think that you felt like you wanted to be an entrepreneur from early on?
No, I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur. I saw myself as a problem solver. And you can be a problem solver in a business. You can be a problem solver on a business. I saw myself as somebody a little discontent with the status quo. And I just didn't know what that meant at the time, right?
Okay.
And that eventually evolved into entrepreneurship. I mean, originally, my undergrad was computer science and economics. I mean, I knew I was techie. I wanted to do something what I thought was around business. When I graduated from undergrad, I first met my wife at a bookstore, and I was reading Intellectual Property, the story of copyright in the 2000s or something like that. I thought I was going to become a lawyer. I also thought I was going to be pre-med because my freshman year at Northwestern took chemistry, and I got a C. And I took econ, and I got an A. And so I said, all right, both of them can make me equally as happy. Which one am I better at? And realistically, I'm better at business than I am at medicine or law. So, yeah, it was a journey just to even find entrepreneurship. I was not born an entrepreneur.
So, Get Cheap Books was your baby during college. So, what happened after college?
So, after college, I was trying to think about what the right transition was for me, because Get Cheap Books was paying decent money actually, but certainly not enough for me to take it on as a full-time job. And so, like a lot of entrepreneurs, it starts out as a side hustle, right? And that's really what Get Cheap Books was. So after college, I worked at a consulting company, and it was big data before big data was a thing. So basically, what we did is we looked at every prescription written in the United States and helped pharmaceutical companies decide what new products to launch and how their sales reps should call on doctors and other kind of go-to-market strategies like that. So it was a fantastic training ground to be able to chug a massive amount of information and then pare it down to how is this actually actionable. And there are a lot of people who work at consulting firms who work more on the pure strategy side. And they're some of my friends, but it drives me crazy. You know, sometimes these people who work at Bain or BCG or McKinsey, and they write a vision statement for the CEO, and it sits on a binder on the CEO's shelf. Whereas the type of consulting that I was fortunate enough to do was super detail oriented and actionable. And so it was a great training ground, again, to be able to synthesize big information, take it down, and to make it into actionable things that you're actually going to do. So I was doing that. And the funny thing is that on the side, of course, long hours, but continued to work on Get Cheap Books, and it grew and it grew and it grew until eventually it was paying me more than the consulting job was.
Are
And
you
so,
serious? I didn't
yeah,
know that.
yeah. And so I actually retired for about a year, semi-retired when I was like 20 something years old, and played a lot of golf. I got my pilot's license and, had some time to reflect on a couple of things. People sometimes ask me, well, why don't you, that should have been it, right? But I looked at Get Cheap Books, and similar actually in some ways to that original Tetris company, is there wasn't a lot of things that were defensible about it. And so I could see that the earnings from it were eventually going to erode as there were more and more people who came in and did the same concept. So sure, it's good money in the present, but an entrepreneur is trying to build something that's going to last. And so I had the idea that I still want to be an entrepreneur. At this point, it's clear that that's what my goal is going to be. But I need to shore up my skill sets and be able to really run a business more competitively. And so that's when I decided to go into business school.
So what ended up happening? Did you still have Get Cheap Books when you went into
Yeah,
business school?
so I didn't want to run it. It's funny, I was willing to run Get Cheap Books while I was have a job, but not when I was in school, and then not back in business school. And so I ended up selling it to a larger price comparison website. Price Grab. I actually forget the name of the company. I think it was Price Grabber or something like that. Again, you got to put your like 2002 hat on, right?
Right.
So a long time ago. But yeah, sold it. So I kind of had a one chunk payday, and then took some of that money to go back to business school.
Okay. And what year did you go to business school again?
So business school was 2006 to 2008.
Okay.
So I had worked from 2002 until 2006, and so there are people who ask me now, oh, should I get a business undergrad? And I would advise against it because I don't think you know a lot about business before you actually have a real job. So I'm thankful that I did 4 years of real work, both at the consulting company and then the entrepreneurial venture before I went back to business school.
Yeah. Okay. So business school, what was your focus going into that? What was the intention that you wanted to set?
Yeah.
And what did you want to get out of business school by the time it was over?
Yeah. And I think that's exactly the right way if you're thinking about going into post-grad. Certainly that's the way I thought about it is, what do I want to get out of this, right? Because it's not either free from a time commitment standpoint or a cost commitment standpoint. It's not free. So you better be getting something out of it, either personally or financially. And so what I thought to myself was, I think I'm strong in certain skills, but I knew I was weak in other skills. The undergrad in economics kind of built basic foundations, but and I already had the entrepreneurial bug, but I really did not have a good understanding of marketing and other considerations like that. And so I decided to go to a school that was good in the things that I was bad at, frankly, right? Because I could have gone to a school that maybe had a better prestige from an entrepreneurship standpoint, but I'm like, I sort of already have that a little bit. What are the things I don't have, and what's the school that's going to really challenge me? And so marketing continues to be one of the very strong focuses of Kellogg Northwestern's business school. And so that's the reason that I wanted to go there. The other thing, and I didn't discover this actually until I was there, was graduate school is a great time to take risks. Because no matter what, you're not going to have a job for probably 2 years, depending on the type of graduate school. So that's your time to try and fail, as opposed to it's harder when you're in the real world with a real job, right? To be able to take some of those risks. And so that's the other secret lining that I didn't expect going in, but it allowed me to muck around with a lot of different thoughts and concepts when I was there.
Okay. So what types of things came up? What types of things did you take risks on?
Take risks on. Well, I mean, all sorts of things. One of them was with your husband Tim, my good friend as well. So
talk about that a little
exactly.
bit.
So we tried to start we started a company called True Yardage. True Yardage was a app on your phone that would tell you the distance if you're on a golf course to all the obstacles. So it would say, all right, you're 150 yards from the water and you're 220 yards to clear the water. And again, you got to put your 2006, 2007 hat on, right? Technology has changed since then. But it was basically the first app to kind of do that. It was written for BlackBerry, believe it or not, because at the time, the iPhone wasn't even out. So we wrote it, and it was successful in some ways and not successful in others. And that's one of the ways that I think about things is, how do you measure success, right? Because it's on the outside, sometimes it looks like everyone's is super successful, but that doesn't mean that they're really satisfied, right? Or accomplished in what they actually want. And so let me describe that for True Yardage. So True Yardage was successful in the sense that we started it. We actually won the Kellogg-wide business school competition with it, so we got some seed money and the rest of it. We got the app up and running and a prototype. The challenge was that 3 of the founding members, myself, Tim, and one other guy, Kevin, we all had exactly the same backgrounds. We were all ex-consultants. And so none of us really, none of us were specific technology people. None of us were operations people. None of us, were amateur golfers. So, we really didn't know how to take it to the next level and turn it into an implementable thing. And so I compare that with the founding team at Element Bars, the current company that I've run for the last 18 years. And I'll talk about that journey in a second, but the founding team there was a woman getting a PhD in nutrition, a guy who had his master's in engineering, and myself who had a business degree. That's a much more diverse, both from a skill set, from a gender, from a background, from almost every angle. And that is going to be the success of a company, is having that diverse set of different skills to be able to execute on whatever comes, because you just don't know what's going to be out there.
Yeah, I love that. So not a lot of people probably know about True Yardage. Do you see that as a failure, or do you see that as something else?
No, I see it as a failure.
Okay.
And the good news is that the people that I started it with are still my friends, right? And so you have to evaluate. It's again, how do you evaluate success or failure, right? So it certainly wasn't a failure from a personal standpoint. These are some of my best friends, right? And we went through it together, and we still laugh about it, right? In a good way. So from that sense, it wasn't necessarily a failure. It's a failure in the sense that it did not make money. And when we started it, our original concept was, we're going to be able to expense golf. It's going to be great. We're going to be out there in the golf course all the time. And I spent less time on the golf course the year and a half that I was working on that business than I did at, any other time in my life. And so it was, failure from that perspective. And then again, it didn't necessarily make money. And so I look back on it with that lens. Failure, but not disappointed, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's get into the nitty gritty. You've been working with Element Bars for, you said 18 years.
18 years.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
It makes...
It's my oldest kid.
That's true.
It is. I mean, my daughter is 15, my son is 13, and it was around before them. And to see it grow in that way is an interesting reflection of what it means to start a company, right?
Yeah.
When you compare it, if you have children, if you compare it where your children are in terms of development as well.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what was happening when you came up with the idea. I know that there's stuff on your website, but were you done with business school? Like, give me the lay of the land.
So the actual seed predates even business school.
Okay.
So when I was in that consulting job, so even before I semi-retired and started, got the pilot's license, in the consulting job, I used to work long hours. I remember I had a 106-hour week once, which is basically like 18 hours a day, the whole time. Slept under my desk, And there are hero stories that you hear about this from other CEOs, but I do think you will go through, anybody, regardless of whether or not you're an entrepreneur, you will go through peak work. There's going to be a time when you are just absolutely near burnout, right? And that is an interesting experience unto itself. So I'm not encouraging people, but what I would say is almost everyone goes through it. And so recognize this is peak work and that there is life outside of peak work. So I'm in one of these peak work times, 106-hour weeks at the consulting job, flying to go visit customers. And, basically I used to buy an off-the-shelf bar. And I remember it was like a cookies and cream bar, and the thing tasted great. It was great. But I turned the bar over, looked at the list of ingredients, and it was just junk, right? Lots of ingredients ending in alls like maltitol and sorbitol, and lots of ingredients that I'm just like, I don't know what this is. So I started making bars in my own kitchen. So every Sunday, would make a 9x13 pan of bars in my kitchen, wrap them up aluminum foil, and take them to work. My friends used to joke around. They would call them space cakes just because they were all wrapped in aluminum foil. And I did that for a year and a half. Never thought of it as a business. Again, back to sort of that carpenter thing that I alluded to before, right? I like woodworking, but I'm not necessarily going to become a carpenter. So this was another thing that I did because I wanted to do it myself, but I didn't see it as a business. So I did it for a year and a half. I was introduced to a woman named Maria, who became one of the co-founders of Element Bars. She was getting her PhD in nutrition at University of Chicago. My wife, who's a physician, was also there doing her fellowship in pediatric endocrinology. And so the two of them, Maria and my wife Jenny, worked together in the same lab. And Maria independently wanted to come up with a bar for kids with diabetes. So my wife, the super connector that she is, very outgoing and social, which is great. Always good to have a yin for the yang. And so she introduces the two of us and says, hey, Maria's trying to make this bar for kids with diabetes. You're making these darn bars every Sunday in our kitchen. Maybe the two of you should chat. She introduces the two of us. And the interesting insight was that launched Element Bars from just a hobby into a business is raisins. And raisins were the ingredient that Maria wanted to put into her bar. And I hate raisins. Like they don't belong in a carrot cake. They don't belong in baked goods. They just don't belong. I'm not saying it's a bad ingredient. It's just not for me, right? And so she had raisins in her bar, and I was like, I don't like raisins. Do I really want to launch a bar that has raisins in them? Or can we try to take a step back and think broadly about it? The bar that I like isn't necessarily the bar that you like. So we decided to launch a custom bar company. So that was the original version of Element Bars, was you get to pick the ingredients that you wanted. If you want raisins, knock yourself out, right? But if you want whey protein and soy protein in there, great, right? Or you want it without added, clean label and just date-based, we can make you that type of bar. So the raisin moment, I think, happens in almost any entrepreneur's journey, which is what is going to transform this from a personal passion of mine into a business? And what is that? What can you actually drill down to? What insight is there that actually makes you different than what's out there?
Yeah. So how did you start testing this idea, or where did you actually realize, like, oh my gosh, this is
this is gonna be something.
This is gonna be something.
Well, I mean, at the time, of course, I didn't know what it was going to be, right? There are people who talk about a business as if it's manifest destiny, and I don't believe that at all. It's a journey of 1,000 little trials and errors, to your point. And so I'm a firm believer in start small, but think big. So I could have wrote business plans and created or built a kitchen, or maybe even gone to a shared kitchen or whatever else. But I was like, you know what? Let's not go overdo it. Let's go see if I can prove this out on the small scale to start out with. So being the tech person that I was, I built a very wireframe version of the website and put it up there, sent it out to some people, and got orders back. I was shocked that I got the orders back, and I'm like, well, I don't have walnuts, so literally went to Trader Joe's to go buy, the bag of walnuts and be able to make them in my kitchen and figure out all those little bugs, right? Some of the bugs were associated with the technology. These, it crashed if you did this and this. Some of it had to do with a recipe, right? It's like these ingredients don't work together. I mean, it was literally, I will send you a baggie of the powder, but there's not enough ingredients in here. So there's definitely some recipe related things. There was learnings about how to get it to the customer. Do you use UPS or FedEx? Do you use USPS? And these are things that you could write in a business plan. But until you actually do it and experience it, I don't feel like you really, really know what's right and what's wrong. So whenever I'm chatting with other people who are thinking about going into entrepreneurship, I always remind them, don't be the person who spends 6 months just spinning their wheels on an idea or writing. It's like, try something, anything, right? And that's going to give you the feedback to be able to take it to the next level.
I love this because this is exactly how I started my business. I know that I did not want to be an entrepreneur. I was convinced, and I worked at Northwestern, I was convinced that I was going to retire there, and life did not have it that way. And so I think that even for the first 10 years of my business, I still feel like I'm trying to figure it out. And just now I'm like, okay, I have all these different things, but maybe I need to start focusing on having a plan and being intentional. And I did spend about 6 months before even launching this to think about, what is it that I want to do for this podcast. And I still feel like, I did have a plan going in and now I have to completely change it. So I think that there's validity in having that opportunity to just test it out first.
Correct.
So.
Definitely to test it out. And the expression I use in this case is ready, fire, aim. Right? The normal way that you would think about these things is you're supposed to aim before you fire, right? Ready, aim, fire.
Yeah.
Or aim, fire, right?
So
switching. It's switching those two around. And that's the idea. I know it's obviously hard to change the course of a speeding bullet, and that's the way it feels sometimes. Is like the life is just going this fast, and how are you really going to change the trajectory? But I live by that mantra: is I'm going to go out there and test it, as opposed to just leaving a bullet in the chamber and not actually taking a chance.
I love that. Okay, so one of our ASC community members, I asked people in my community to grill you for questions, and I think this is a good time to place this here. How did you decide on the name of the company, Element Bars? Because that is such an important branding piece, right? So where did that come from?
It is. So I wrote the business plan for Element Bars in business school. So I talked about the journey of exploring lots of different ideas there. So True Yardage was one, Element Bars was another, and I even wrote a third business plan that was around physicians' calls. And so in business school, the nice thing is there's a lot of free labor. And the free labor is your other classmates. And so every chance I had, I would use Element Bars as the project to be able to do for the class. So if it was market research, I'd be like, well, there's this company called Element Bars. Can we do market research for it? And that would be kind of the capstone part of the class. And other people who were excited to be able to do something besides boring, just regular old coursework were like, sure, we're happy to sign on to the idea. So in one of these market research classes, I put together a survey and asked a number of different questions, which included things like, what ingredients are you interested in? And who are you from an aspect of like marketing and positioning, how should we position this company? And the last question was going to be, what should we name this company? And so we had maybe 5 or 6 different names in there. And I'm almost ready to hit submit and send. And my wife says, a friend of ours just opened up this bike store called Element Multisport here in Chicago. That's an interesting name. You should throw in the word element into one of the potential names. And so I didn't come up with a name. My wife actually came up with a name, just kind of observing around. She put it in there, and the feedback, it was the most statistically significant answer we got. Sometimes on these surveys, you kind of get a mush of data or whatever else. Of the 5 or 6 categories, Element won like 80% of the feedback. So it was a pretty clear winner. So if it wasn't for my wife and, chatting with her about the idea, I don't think I would have come up with that name.
So we're going to get into what I'm most excited to hear about, which basically shifted the trajectory of your company.
Yeah.
And I want to hear a little bit about the timeline in between when Element Bars was the thing that you were pursuing and when you decided to apply to be on Shark Tank.
Yeah.
And it was season 1, right?
Season 1.
Season 1.
So, yeah, any successful business that I think is on Shark Tank has to be a real business. Because they're smart people. They're going to see through any fluff that you throw at them. Mm-hmm. And so when I started the business, the first question is, I can't keep making it out of my own house. So there's the initial kind of scaling question of how do you take it from just a in-home kind of craft into a real business. And so for me, a mantra I live by is the perfect partner complements your weaknesses. Okay, and so in this case, what I needed was somebody who could make the stuff for me. So there's lots of different ways you can make food. In certain states, you can do it at a small scale out of your own house. You can do it in a shared kitchen. You can hire somebody else to be able to make it yourself, or you could set up your own facility. So there's lots of different options. And so I thought about each one of those options. And originally, I was going to set up my own manufacturing place. And I was like, that's a lot of risk, a lot of money. You know, how can I do this on a smaller scale? Again, test, iterate on it at a smaller scale. So what I did was I went around and I found a wedding cake bakery in Humboldt Park, which is a area of Chicago that has a great love of food, but isn't necessarily the most crowded place in Chicago. And when I went to them, originally I was just going to rent their space and bring in my own employees. But it turns out they make these elaborate three-dimensional cakes. And so they bake the cakes on Monday and Tuesday, and they frost them on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they're not using their ovens. And so they did small batch, like just like I needed to make 12 bars for individual customers. And so the combination of that, of the fact that they had expertise and where I wasn't strong, and they had a need where I had a need, and it didn't conflict from a resource standpoint, was kind of a great way to get the thing up and off the ground. And so that was the first place. And for the first 6 months to a year, that's where we made the product. And so I could concentrate on the tech and the sales and the marketing, and the Wedding Cake Bakery could concentrate on actually physically making the bars.
Interesting. So I think that was around the time that I tried to place an order, right? Because I think it was beyond the point when you were still doing it at your house,
Yeah.
but you were.
So tell me about all the failures in that first order. Because, you know, again, knowing where you haven't succeeded can be helpful, right? A first-time entrepreneur, they will find out that somebody else has their exact same idea, and then they'll be very discouraged. Mm-hmm. And what I would encourage them to do is to say, can I do it any better? So specifically for me, right around that same time, almost a year after launching the business, maybe one or two people email me and they said, hey, have you heard about this other company in California that also does customized bars? So the first time entrepreneur is like, that's it. You know, I think they copied me or something else like that. Turns out this company had been around for several years longer than I had. I thought I independently came up with an idea, and I did, but any good idea has been done before. So what do? I order from them, right? And the website didn't have drag and drop features, so it kind of wasn't as fun to play with. And it took them 4 weeks to get me the order. And when it arrived, this one's subjective, was I didn't think it tasted very good. So I was like, all right, how can I actually do this one better? And so, so you ordered early on, and it was an experience, I'm sure.
So here's the customer
Yep.
take on Element bars early on. So I remember your website having all of the different steps. I think it was really laid out really well in terms of pick your ingredients. Yep. You want rice? Do you want all these things? So there's a lot of options, which is really, really good. So me as a consumer, I think I know, like, ooh, I like sugar, like anything that's sweet. So I was basically throwing anything in that sounded good. At the time, I wasn't religiously eating bars. Like, I knew some that tasted good, but half the time I didn't even know what was in it. Mm-hmm. And so I ordered 3 different sets of bars. I think I ordered one that we gave out at my brother and sister-in-law's wedding shower, I think. So that was 2013. And what I also liked is that you could name the bar.
Sure, exactly. We forgot about that one. And that was huge, for sure. Yeah. And it leads to another way for the product to be used, which is gifting, like you did, right?
Yeah. So I had my sister-in-law pick, the ingredients that she liked. I think there was coconut in there. It was just, very island feel because she's from Guam. We made a Schluter bar. It didn't taste the best. Right. Never ordered that again, but it was a really cool concept for sure. I think at that point it would have been helpful to say, like, these tend to pair well together. Or if you like this kind of bar, you might want to have these ingredients, but hey, we're healthier, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting, you were having that insight as a customer right as the business was just starting to pivot. So if this was around 2013 or so, that was about 4 or 5 years into the business. And the challenge we were having with the business at that time was paralysis because of so many choices. Customers like to be presented with choices, but the number of possible combinations on the website was over 6 million. And that led to challenges in, I would say, 3 separate areas. One area was that there would be the customer experience is like, I don't know what I want. Right? You want to give the customer some sense of choice, But at the same time, it'd be better to be able to guide them to the right solution. And so something we had introduced maybe a little after that time was a quiz that you could take that would guide you into kind of a preset, more like 14 or 15 different bars, as opposed to 6 million possible bars, right?
Yeah.
The second was, because every batch was handmade, there'd be inconsistencies batch to batch. And while customers have some expectation of artisanal differences for small batch, not when it comes to bars. You're willing to give somebody a little bit of credit if there's artisanal differences in a cookie or something else, but in a bar, you really expect homogeneity. And so how it's mixed, how long it's mixed, you would definitely get variances in that one. And then the final was that the taste, because of all the combinations, didn't turn out to be that great to a lot of these end customers. And so at that point, almost half of my business was actually manufacturing bars for other brands. So let's rewind for a second though, because we're kind of past Shark Tank at that point.
Yeah.
So let's rewind, because there's a journey that Shark Tank sort of kicks off and explains where we are today.
Yeah.
So,
So first things first,
Yeah.
it was season 1.
Season 1.
So how did you hear about it? What made you think that you wanted to be on TV? I love you, but I feel like you're not the type of person that I would see on a TV show
Correct.
or even want to be on a TV show.
Yeah.
So how did that all
How
happen?
did that all come to be? So, as you said, it was season 1. So that means it wasn't an existing show that you've seen before, right? But what I saw was that I get a newsletter that covers venture capital transactions, so in other investments. There's a little blurb that said, Mark Burnett, the producer behind Survivor and Apprentice, is coming out with a new show based on this British show, because all good US shows are based on British shows, called Dragon's Den or something along those lines, in which entrepreneurs are going to pitch venture capital for investment. I was like, that's kind of intriguing. So I Google around and I find an email address, sharktankcasting@yahoo.com. By the way, I'm sure that email doesn't exist anymore, but that's where I found it. I copied and pasted a 1-paragraph PR blurb that I had written and sent off to other PR places, and that's it. That was literally the extent of me applying for the show. Again, I'm sure it's way different now and way more competitive, but it was see an opportunity, act on it quickly, and then sent it off.
So this feels like a really natural place to pause, because what Jonathan just shared is such a powerful example of taking action before you feel fully ready. And as you just heard, that mindset is exactly what led him to take a chance on something that would end up changing the trajectory of his business. Ready, fire, aim. In the next episode, we're going to pick up right there and get into his Shark Tank experience, what it was actually like, and what happened after. I'll see you in the next episode.